accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Happy holiday, Green Lanterns fans. It's Myron Rumsey from the podcast of OA, and you're joining us for a special holiday episode number 184. As I'm usually joined, my good friend Phil Bova is here with us tonight. Phil, my friend, are you ready for the holiday?
I am ready. I left work on Friday. I checked out. So right now I'm happily into, day 3, day 4. And just getting ready for Clark's first Christmas. We still got some shopping to get done tomorrow. So I'm good, man. I'm just I'm enjoying my break. Don't go back to the 4th of January. So I'm sitting good.
Nice. For those of you that were not on the East Coast, we recently got pounded with a winter storm, and here where I live, we got hit with a little over 2 foot of snow, which was crazy. I was just telling Phil off mic before we recorded, the end of my driveway where they plowed me in was up to my chest, and I'm about 5 foot 10 inches tall, so it was close to 5 foot of snow at the end of my driveway where they kind of plowed me in.
Gosh, I wish we would have gotten some snow this Christmas. That would have been nice.
All I got to say is I wish I had a power ring that I could have plowed the snow up with instead of breaking my back. Because we sometimes get a lot of snow, but not this kind of snow. We haven't gotten a snow like this, I don't think, since the 1990s. So I don't own a snowblower. And so it was all, back-breaking physical labor. But
I know. Where's those power rings when you need them?
Exactly. It would be great to have something to help get through it a little bit quicker.
All right.
But at any rate, it's the holiday season. We're going to release this episode on Christmas Eve is my plan right now. If not, maybe on the 23rd. It depends on how long it takes me to do the post-production part. But this particular episode, we've got 3 holiday-themed Green Lantern books to go over. Is kind of a retro review kind of thing. We're going to be talking about Green Lantern Mosaic number 9 and Green Lantern Volume 3 number 36. Both of those were published in 1992. And then we've got from 2001 Spectre number 12, which is the time when Hal Jordan was the Spectre. So we've got those 3 books to talk about. We recently recorded episode 183, so we don't have a lot of news, but I do want to thank a couple of our listeners. Hal 2814 and Omega Lazarus recently put in some iTunes reviews and some very nice comments, and I just kind of wanted to shout them out for doing that, because those iTunes reviews, they help boost our visibility inside of iTunes when people go to the iTunes store and search for, let's say they search for Green Lantern and you see podcasts come up. Well, basically the top reviewed and top commented and having a lot of content show up, and usually ourselves and Lantern Cast show up in there somewhere, but sometimes shows that are more popular than ours that maybe have done a Green Lantern episode, but they cover a broader spectrum, so they're not quite such a niche podcast, they get put in front of ours. So people find their shows before they find ours. So it's great to leave reviews on our podcast and for the Lantern Cast, because it boosts both of our shows. So I appreciate that. And Hal2814 said, been listening for about a year, and I love this podcast. The hosts know a lot about Green Lantern history and make it easy for newer readers to understand how much lore there is behind the characters. I also like the interviews they've done. They're far more professional than a lot of fan interviews I've listened to. I also like that the hosts aren't afraid to tell you when they don't like something, but they don't come off as condescending to people who might have a different opinion. Thank you so much for that. And Omega Lazarus said, and that person just posted theirs a couple days ago, awesome people talking about a great character, not afraid to go, air quotes, against the grain with their opinions, and it's quite refreshing to hear. And thank you for that. I often, there's so much negativity around comics sometimes and comics podcasters, and we try to be even-handed, but at the same time, when we don't like something, whether it's the direction or a book or editorial decisions, we have to feel free to express what we don't like, because if if our commentary is going to have any value, it needs to be weighted fairly. And if we tell you everything is roses all the time, then what value does that have if we don't really feel that way? So it's our own integrity we have to keep an eye on there. So thank you both for that.
Well, and the medium needs a narrative. It's like, we can openly talk about differences just as much as we can openly talk about things that we like we like together. It's easy to do on both ends as long as you do it respectfully. And I like what they said. I like what Hal said. About we don't come off as condescending because we're not trying to be. It's an upbeat podcast. We talk about our stuff, and then a lot of times, if the stuff's not going the way we like it, just like everybody out there in fandom knows, you get down, and sometimes that reflects on what we're talking about. And I'm a fan just like Myron is, and I'm always looking forward to hearing about stuff that's going to be coming, stuff they're going to be doing with a character, and and sometimes we get shot down with some information that we just don't think we like. But I mean, that's the thing about fandom. We all like so much and in so many different ways. So and we go against the grain. Sure. I mean, because not everything's perfect when it comes to the Green Lantern world. We all know that. I mean, I have my faults, just like I don't like Simon Baz, and Myron doesn't like Jessica Cruz. So
I don't like
two great comments.
Yeah, I don't like Simon Baz either, but.
Right. So, but it's okay. I mean, we're people like that. I don't expect everybody to like everybody I like. I mean, I like the Wonder Twins. I got made fun of for years because I like those two. But we like who we like, and I respect yours just as much as you respect mine.
Right.
Just don't make me wear a Batman shirt.
Right.
I
just because I don't like the character doesn't mean that it's not okay for somebody else to like a character.
Right.
That's certainly, that's the thing. And we might poke fun at characters and some of those things, but we would never do that against a person. Unless they're Jeff Thorne. But anyway.
and also think about it like this. Green Lantern fans, everybody out there, regardless, is a Green Lantern fan. That's the base, right? Ryan Reynolds has been bashing on Green Lantern for years now, and I mean, it's all in good joke. It gets old after a while, sure, but it's all in good fun.
Right, that's right. So I'm excited to talk about these 3 books, and in these books were all recommended to us by listeners. So I'm excited for that. I'm very thankful to the listeners for putting out some books besides the Larfleeze Christmas special that deals with the holidays. I think that's great. You read books for a long time, and sometimes you forget that stuff. So it's great to be reminded of people that there's other things out there that we might have forgotten. And I think that's the great part of the community we've been trying to build over the years is that, nobody expects everybody to be perfect or to know it all. And when somebody has a great idea, that's awesome. And I want to take that and run with it. So I'm excited to talk about these 3 books. I reread them all today in preparation for the episode and the recording this evening. And boy, I'd forgotten how long it had been since I read some of these. You get so wrapped up in I don't want to say the cult of the new, but you're buying your books when you buy them, and you're kind of so wrapped up in things you haven't read before that it isn't often that we go back and revisit some things, and you forget how much you might have liked something or enjoyed just reading the story, because it's bagged up in a box somewhere. So thank you.
It's refreshing too. I mean, Mosaic was a refreshing issue, and it touched on a lot of topic points that are hitting in social culture today.
Yep. So let's take a quick break. We have a Know Your Core segment to do, and then we'll come back. And why don't we start right out with the Mosaic issue, since that one and the Green Lantern 36 both were published in the exact same month. So let's do that, and we'll be back in just a moment.
All right.
I say there, boy.
Sir?
Yes, you.
Mr. Scrooge?
What day is it?
Why, it's New Comic Book Day today, sir.
New comic... I haven't missed it. I'm not too late. Happy day. Timmy.
Sir?
Happy New Comic Book Day.
Happy New Comic Book Day to you, sir.
Happy New Comic Book Day to us all.
Happy New Comic Book Day to us all. Happy New Comic Book Day, everyone.
Hello again, fellow Owens, and happy holidays, and 'tis the seasons to you all. This week, on another Know Your Core segment, we have Grumb. That's Grumb, Grumb. He is the Green Lantern of Space Sector, 1198. Grumb was created by Jeff Johns and Ethan Von Sciver in Green Lantern Volume 4, Issue Number 4. Grumb was a soldier in the Nameless Army when he was drafted into the Corps, and for the first few months of his life as a Green Lantern, he didn't even have a name. Grumb has dreams of working along Kilowog as a trainer. And there you have it, another unknown lantern from the Green Lantern Corps on the Know Your Core segment.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of
All right, Phil. Well, we've got a couple of books to talk about that were published in 1992. They both had February 1993 cover dates, but they released right around Christmas time in 1992. And I want to preface this because Gerard Jones is certainly a controversial figure in terms of Green Lantern because of his activities outside of comics. So I just want to point out as we talk about this that we're in no way endorsing Gerard Jones and his behavior and the actions he had. But you have to remember at the time that these books were written, we don't even know if that behavior was going on. And so we're looking at this of the work of the art and not judging the artist. So I just kind of want to throw that in there. But first book we want to talk about is Green Lantern Mosaic number 9. Now, for people that might not have read this series, this is during the time frame when Gerard Jones relaunched Green Lantern after it had been in Action Comics Weekly. This is where they aged Hal and gave him the Grey Temples and all that stuff. And this is fairly early on in his run. The Green Lantern book is about 3 years in. So it's 3 years in. The Green Lantern book was right around issue number 36. So this is while they were in the process of Kevin Dooley and Gerard Jones starting to butt heads. So this is kind of before both books kind of went downhill. But what they did was Gerard Jones had a really interesting idea to do. He was trying to expand the Green Lantern mythology. He was trying to grow the brand. And he decided to give John Stewart his own book. And plot-wise, what happened was the Guardians basically wanted to test the universe and cultures on different planets. And so they grabbed cities from all of these different planets and put them on Oa. And they called it the Mosaic world. And so you had all these different societies that were living side by side, and they didn't necessarily get along. And some of them had very alien ways. You had an Earth city. You had a city from Zudar and the Zudarians. You had some brand new races that were created just for the book. So it was very experimental in that regard, in that it was about this under a magnifying glass of a study of different cultures. And Gerard Jones was using this book to talk about things on a very, almost a metaphysical level. People talk about Grant Morrison sometimes and how heady he can be. And this was Gerard Jones doing some pretty heady stuff. And John was basically put in charge of the Mosaic world and trying to keep it functioning and from people going at each other. So he was removed from his sector duties, and he was basically put in charge of the Mosaic world. And over time, we meet different characters. Salak shows up. He has a romantic interest in Rose Harden, and they are trying to, I don't want to say they're building a home, but basically these people are trying to deal with, they all want to go home. They all want to go back to their worlds. And so they're struggling with this. I can't believe I'm on an alien planet, and missing their home worlds, and dealing with, being next door to warriors and people who eat other people, and so on. So it was an interesting, a very explorative title. And the series Green Lantern Mosaic lasted about 18 issues. It was canceled around the same time as Emerald Twilight, in part because Kevin Dooley and Gerard Jones, Kevin Dooley was the editor, the writer and the editor did not get along at all, and Gerard Jones kind of quit the book. right around the time he had his own plot for Emerald Twilight. They brought in Ron Mars, and the rest is history. But Mosaic was outright canceled because DC decided basically to throw the Green Lantern Corps mythology away with the bathwater because they didn't want to be tied to all the continuity and all the headaches that were involved in all the years of Green Lantern stories. They thought, let's just wipe the slate clean. So that's what kind of frames some of this stuff. Now, Green Lantern Mosaic number 9 had a story called Merry Mosaic, and Gerard Jones did the writing. The artwork was by Jim Ballet and Mark Beechman, excuse me. And what was interesting during this time is that John had a very stylized costume. So it wasn't the costume that you see him in now. It had an interesting take on the Green Lantern logo where the top of the white circle was gone and the Green Lantern logo kind of expanded out to his chest line area. And then he had these green stripes down the outside of his uniform on the bottom, and there were no boots. It was all black with the green stripe. And he was bared from the forearm down. On both sides, there were no gloves, but there were no gauntlets down to the wrist either. So it looked a little odd in some ways, but it was kind of cool, kind of stylized. And in the story, basically it's Christmas time, and John is trying to create some kind of normalcy for the humans that are stuck on the Mosaic world. And so there's Christmas trees, and he's decorating, and he's invited some representatives of different cultures over to share in a small Christmas party. So that kind of sets the stage for this story. So, Phil, what did you think about it after you had a chance to read it?
Well, I like how he reminisces about his life back home on Earth. Because he always focuses on like how Christmas this time of the year, how much he misses his family, and with not reading the full breadth of Mosaic in quite some manner of time. I assume he's been there for a while now, so like he had to adapt to living in that world, just like during this time frame this was written, he had to adapt how he was living as a black man in this world,
Yeah, and it's nice because I think Gerard Jones tried to give John some more character because up until now John was either in the early 70s when he was created by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, he was kind of the stereotypical angry black man. And they kind of wanted to, they were building on the whole architecture part. Prior to the animated series Justice League, John was not a Marine then. He was an architect. He was a builder. And so they really tried to play off of that. And this whole series was very much an exploration of the character as much as it was anything else. And so we actually get to see John Stewart as a kid opening up this story when he's talking about the star and the star Sirius and the star on Christmas Eve and the red and green mixture of colors and so on. And so there's a lot of character building. And I really think that this series made John the most interesting I think he's been before and since, to be quite honest.
I think it's deep. It shows deep character.
Yeah.
And it's good for John Stewart. I'm not a hater on John Stewart. He was never really my first Lantern, but like rereading this, it got me to know him in a different way. I've always been like, I don't know, always had an issue with him because he killed Mogo. That made me sad, but anyway, this is a different take on the character, and Gerard Jones, he did a great job with him.
John is very much an intellectual in this series, and I've always I don't want to say my problems with the characters. I don't have a problem with the character, but why I've never really been a big John Stewart fan is because there's so little charisma to the character, and this kind of goes with the same lines. He's not very charismatic per se, but he's very contemplative and very intellectual. So it's just a different take on things. There's some things that are kind of funny. There's a spot here where Rose asks him about the other holiday, and he thinks she's talking about Hanukkah, but she's really talking about Kwanzaa. And he's like, well, I never even heard of Kwanzaa before I read it in the paper, which I thought was interesting. But
and it even said 15 million African Americans observe it.
Yeah, but he goes, it must be 15 million I don't know. It's interesting, but there's allusions to Islam and alien cultures and how they don't celebrate Christmas per se, but they have their own celebratory things. So they have the Zudarians talk about things that they celebrate. There's a species in here that are a species of warriors, and they can regrow limbs and so on. So a lot of their celebrations involve dismemberment because they can grow their limbs back, but they're a warrior species. And the character, I think, is even called Tendon Ripper, is the name of the character. So it's just interesting. There's a frog species that they celebrate by going out in the mud and celebrating in the mud and singing their frog type songs, and it's just interesting to see these different cultures come together.
I like the one where that I don't know what that species is. It looks like Tomar Ray.
Oh, they're Zodarians. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And he tells that story.
Kid. And the kid's like, what? Is that it? But they're kind of, it's an interesting thing because it's a cultural sharing. And Rose, for example, she has a real hard time with the warrior species. The warrior picks up her son, and she, of course, thinks that he's about to get ripped apart. And you're like, we don't regrow limbs like you guys do. And she goes, I can't believe that you would fight and you would kill to celebrate a holy day. And the guy says, well, the killing is holy. So it's just interesting because you get what I like about how Gerard Jones approached this series was you got to see things through a lot of different lenses. So it challenged the reader to think as much as it challenged John to think through this process of how do I get these people to get along?
Right. And which is a reflection of us today.
Yeah. It's a series that still holds up. It's a shame that it hasn't been collected, and I doubt because of the Gerard Jones situation that it's going to get collected. Although they did collect one of those stories, one of those issues in the recent 80th anniversary book, and one of them is being collected in the John Stewart anniversary hardcover that's coming out. So who knows? Maybe sometime as this diminishes, it'll be out there. But you can still find these issues. They're not hard to find. They really didn't go up in value. If anything, they went down in value. So they're not too expensive to find if you're interested in reading them. Like I said, there's only 18 issues. The art for me is a little hit or miss. I don't particularly care for the artwork. It's a little too sketchy, and I don't mean that in the way that it's not that it's sketchy in the art style. Not that there's something wrong with it or potentially criminal about it. It's not that kind of sketchy, but to me, it just lacks detail. In some places, I almost feel like the colors and the line work is a little muddy. But that's
some of the shading is a little off.
Yeah.
I mean, the art didn't bother me as much. I been around this business for so long now. I've seen a lot worse. But
oh yeah.
I think I do kind of like how John Stewart looks, but it's a reflection on that particular version of John Stewart during that time, but he's always been really chiseled, and he's still very chiseled the way he acts in this book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because they keep wanting John to kind of explain Christmas to them, and he doesn't really come right out and explain Christmas to them. He kind of puts his own spin on it. And it's different, and it's interesting because he's trying to figure out himself. How do you explain to these people they can't go home? The Guardians live forever. They don't understand that in the span of 70 years, somebody could live their entire life. So it's important for him to get these people home. So he's got this burden of responsibility of he's trying to get this experiment over so these people can go home and live their lives.
Yeah, it's kind of cute, I mean, because that's the one common theme, home, which has always been a reflection on, getting home for Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. And he talks a lot about It's a Wonderful Life. There's a lot of allusions to It's a Wonderful Life in this particular story, which is interesting. He has a little bit of a manger scene where he has Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus, and the different cultures look at those figurines differently. And that, some of them can't figure out why the adults are kneeling to a baby because they don't understand the Jesus story.
Right. And he even throws in that part about the Renaissance painting.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting take. It's a very narrative heavy I guess would be a good way to phrase it. There's an awful lot of dialogue. This story in particular, there's really no action. This is all dialogue and conversation.
Yeah. But it's rich. I mean, it's a rich conversation with everything that's going on with who's talking to one another.
Yes, very much so.
It's not very dense, but it's a rich topic of conversation. And I think if you read through the lines, you'll see what his point was, as is a metaphor for Mosaic.
Yes, very much so. And it's interesting that the last species he has shows up is a species called the Pans, and they're very childlike. And so they kind of bring this relief to the group because, they're all realizing, this is a holy time for all of these different species. And they're all kind of wrapped up in kind of the feeling of we're not home for the holidays and so on. And the Pans show up and they're very childlike. And so it really lightens the mood and people actually start to smile, even the tendon ripper.
I mean, how many times can you say tendon ripper and laugh and it'd be a good sentence?
Right. But it's interesting. It's just a good all-around story. It is, like I said, it's a little bit more of an intellectual type of a story, but that's not a bad thing either.
Let's not forget the last page. There's no meat in this food, but somehow I like it. Thank you, tendon ripper.
Yeah, it's just it's neat. It's an interesting story. I thought they did a nice job with it. Then flipping gears over to Green Lantern Volume 3, number 36, which is also a Gerard Jones story, and this has got the legendary Gene Ha on pencils. This is
cover. I like this one of my favorite covers.
This cover's neat. It's got a cover of Hal being basically wrapped up by these Christmas lights. Basically it being held at bay by them, which is really cool. Now, during this time frame, you got to remember that Hal had moved on from being a test pilot, and for years DC didn't know what to do. I mean, you got to remember back in 1959 when John Broome and Julius Schwartz kind of recrafted the Silver Age version of Green Lantern. They chose test pilot for Hal Jordan because it was a very, very glamorous career at the time. Well, as the years have gone on, that was no longer the thing. And so they were like, we need to do something different with him. It's not an interesting career. We're not sure what to do with the character now, and so on and so forth. And so he was doing everything from being a toy salesman to an insurance adjuster to a truck driver, you name it. So at this point of the series, and this is issue 36, so we're, about a year away from Emerald Twilight, Hal has just started his own air taxi business. And, I was just looking at this cover. Did you see there's ornaments of, there's a Batman on the Christmas tree, and there's a Nort down below lower. It's cute. There's little details that they put on the cover that Gene Ha did. But anyway.
Of course, Batman's the most prominent, that. Right?
Oh, of course, right. But the issue starts out with Hal flying his plane that he owns, a little paper cub type of a plane, and he's flying to go visit his family for Christmas, and he has Carol Ferris in the plane with him. And now they're not really dating at this point, and just before this issue, in issues leading up to this, he had purged the Star Sapphire influence from Carol Ferris. For those that may not have read the series back then, during Action Comic Weekly and during the Green Lantern Corps book, the Star Sapphire influence on Carol Ferris really went overboard. And there was a time when John Stewart was married to Kat Matui, who, for those that don't know who Kat Matui is, she was the successor to Sinestro. And the two of them had gotten married, and Carol, as Star Sapphire, killed Kat Matui. So Hal is kind of exercised, as in The Exorcist, he kind of exercised the Star Sapphire influence away from Carol. And they're not really dating, but it's one of those cases of they are friends, but not friends with benefits. They're just friends, and she's along for the ride. She would much rather be home by herself alone for Christmas, but Hal has kind of dragged her out to join him as he goes to meet with his family. And it's neat because we see Jack Jordan and his family, And his daughter Helen becomes very important as we go to the Spectre book later on. And Jim and his kids are there, as well as his uncles. One of the uncles' name is Jeremiah, and the other one is Titus. And
hey, Myron, worth noting. You see who's in the Northern Lights reflection, right?
Yes. So
Dr. Light.
Dr. Light. So Dr. Light becomes a major factor in this story. And you see him right in the very beginning. He's almost not corporeal yet. He's basically living light. But Helen and her are on her way to the family Christmas. And Carol really is kind of put on edge because Hal's sister-in-law Susan is talking about Carol having kids and are they going to get married, and they're not even dating at this point. So it really puts Carol on edge, and really I think Carol almost becomes the major character of this story. And along the way, Dr. Light is kind of trying to follow Hal. He doesn't know exactly why he's drawn to Hal, but he senses this light from Hal. But you get the family dynamic when they get to the house and start celebrating Christmas. And again, Carol doesn't understand how Hal's sister-in-law could give up her career to raise a family. And just to give you an idea of the point in time reference, this is right around the time that they did the death of Superman. So when Hal does show up as Green Lantern, he actually has the black armband on him, which is kind of cool. Yeah. But again, that goes back to the days when we actually felt like there was a continuity that went from book to book to book.
Right, because that was for the death of Superman, wasn't
it? Yep. So this is right around the time of the death of Superman. So basically what happens is, and you got to remember too that Hal's sister-in-law thought that Hal's brother Jim was Green Lantern for a while. So the family doesn't know that Hal really is Green Lantern. Jim thinks he might be Green Lantern. Just doesn't know it. He thinks he might, like Star Sapphire, phase out. But they're at the Christmas gathering, and Dr. Light comes through and attacks. At that point in time, Hal's brother's dressed as Santa for the kids, and he thinks the light's coming from the brother. So he attacks Santa Claus just as he's trying to give gifts out to the kids. And so Hal leaps into action. They have a little bit of a battle. And you got to remember, yellow weakness is still in play. So the yellow lights cause an issue and Dr. Light causes an issue. And at the end of the day, when this battle is over, Hal's sister-in-law kind of helps by pulling the lights off of Hal, because Hal is, as the cover implies, gets wrapped by the Christmas lights. And Hal takes on Dr. Light and basically vanquishes him to the power battery and sends him to Oa.
He looks cool with those lights all wrapped around him like that.
Yeah, it's such a neat image. And the kids are, of course, going, wow, how did Green Lantern get here? And Jim's wife thinks that, Jim became Green Lantern for the fight. And so it's kind of, there's a little bit of humor in there too. But
Dr. Light's a cool character. I don't think he gets used too much.
No, I think when they used him in Identity Crisis and they did that whole Rape Sue Dibney thing, I think it kind of tarnished the character. Here, he had died. I believe he died in the Suicide Squad. This was kind of his return, and they kind of tried to give him some other powers where he could kind of like duplicate himself, make light versions of himself. So at one point you see like 5 or 6 versions of Dr. Light all attacking Hal at the same time.
Gotcha.
But it's kind of a neat story all in all. He vanquishes Dr. Light, and then Carol kind of realizes, wow, when I saw Susan sacrifice everything for her kids, she suddenly realized that perhaps there's more to life than being a businesswoman. And the issue ends up with her saying, don't you think it's time we got married? So another fun story.
It is cute. I still miss Carol and Hal's on and off again relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting in this one because she basically comes around to the whole thing. It's interesting. She goes, I thought Sue was a fool putting her life on the back burner for her family. When I saw how she reacted to her son being hurt, I asked myself, have I ever loved anything so much? You have a love like the Green Lantern Corps. Where will I find it? In a corporation? In myself? I guess what I'm saying is, Hal, don't you think it's time we got married? And that's how it kind of ends the issue. And this Carol looks a lot different. She's very much the 90s businesswoman, so she's got very short hair. She spends a lot of time with her arms crossed in this issue.
Much like Lois Lane, she does the same thing.
Yeah, very much so. So another fun issue. It's again, Carol takes kind of center stage because she's gone through this whole thing of losing the Star Sapphire thing, and she's kind of lost her way. So she goes through a lot of self-evaluation, and like I said, in the beginning of the issue, she's very standoffish, and then by the time you get to the end of the issue, she wants to get hitched.
She does. So, side note question to that: what would you think if they ever did marry Hal Jordan and Carol Ferris?
I don't know. It's one of those things where they're always want to get together, but I don't know if they'd ever really be truly happy together as they are now. I think if Hal were to retire and Carol were to step away from Ferris Aircraft, where they could really give each other everything that they felt the other person deserved, it would work. But I think both of them are so driven with, Hal being Green Lantern and Carol being in charge of Ferris Aircraft and keeping her father's legacy alive, that takes so much of their time and energy, and neither one of them is willing to sacrifice what they love to give to each other everything they think the other person deserves. So it's an interesting dynamic. It's different than Clark Kent and Lois Lane. It's different than any other relationship in comics. It's often downplayed and played out differently. I don't think anybody's looked at it from the way I'm looking at it. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong. I mean, it's always kind of been, at one time Carol's ready and Hal isn't, and then Hal's ready and Carol isn't. They're never on the same page at the same time. But I think that's a defense mechanism, and that's just my evaluation of the relationship. And I could be completely wrong, but that's just how I see it.
No, I get it. I mean, it you can't compare it. It's like Aquaman and Mera. They just got married recently in Aquaman's book, and I haven't read the issue itself yet, but I've always thought about what it would be like if they ever decided to marry off Hal Jordan. And to be quite honest with you, knowing the character like I've known for so long, I just don't think marriage is a fitting. I don't know. Maybe not now. Maybe when he's like really, really old getting married, but it just doesn't fit the character to me.
Right. Now, we just had in the Green Lantern Season 2, Issue 10, we had the whole sequence where Hal is ready to kind of almost settle down a little bit and, go take Carol to the stars and raise a family kind of thing.
Right.
And maybe he could do that if he was off Earth. I think being on Earth for Hal as a Green Lantern, now you add the Justice League and all the earthly things to his role as a Green Lantern. And I think that makes it even more difficult for him to have a relationship.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, it kind of seems like Earth to him is a prison.
Yeah, in some ways, and it's hard because there's so much of his supporting cast that are from Earth, and you kind of want to see him. I mean, at least I do. I want to see him interact with other Earth heroes. I want to see him in the Justice League. So I'm not sure where the relationship comes into play there. It's got to be very difficult. That's why I've always wondered, in the Clark Kent Lois Lane relationship, how does that even work? Because Clark he's someone who wants to help people, and he doesn't have to sleep. So how can he go to sleep at night knowing that there's bad stuff going out there? It's got to be hard for him to balance that out. And then how do you give anything to another person? Because you're going to feel guilty because while you're giving something to the person you love and expressing your love to that person, somebody's being killed or somebody's being robbed or, there's all these things going on. And then from Lois's perspective, you're going to feel selfish because you know the exact same thing.
Hey, I just got one thing to add now. Since I do read Superman, still to this day, I would have to suggest that you go back and read Bendis' Superman. He explains it a little bit during his story arc about how they work. But you're right. All your points you brought up are valid. Because I was asking the same thing. It's like, how does that even work? I mean, how do you even balance that kind of time? Let alone they have a kid. Don't forget, Jonathan Kent.
Right.
I know, you're right. I was curious. I don't know if I'd ever see them two married myself. I think it'd be cute, but I think it would have to be like, I would have envisioned them maybe getting married like after a big event like the Blackest Night, because that would have been a cool moment for the book. But, who knows? Whatever. We'll see. Yeah.
It's interesting because I don't think in comics, and maybe I'm not thinking of somebody, but I can't think of a marriage that really lasted and worked. I mean, you've got Barry and Iris.
And that's even tenuous at best, you know.
Right. You know, it always seems like the relationships that they become second nature to the characters in the comic stories, and then they almost become a burden. It's interesting. I don't know, but and you know, there's Spider-Man and Mary Jane. I think they worked out well for a while, but even then, even that went, you know, by the wayside at one point.
Right.
All right, my friend. Well, let's take a quick pause, and we'll come back and we'll talk about the Spectre.
All right.
This is Razer, and you are listening to the blog of Oa. You need to keep listening, otherwise I will track you down with all of my skill, and you will feel my wrath. Razer, singing Razer the Red-Nosed Lantern. You know Aya, Hal Jordan, Kilowog, St. Walker, and Mogo, and Stewart, and Rayner, and Gardner. But do you recall the most angry lantern of all? Razer, the red-nosed lantern, had a very shiny ring, and if you ever saw it, you would run in fear from his bling. All of the other lanterns wouldn't let him help the cause. They always left poor Razer behind the Interceptor's doors. Then one foggy Oa Eve, Hal and Kilowog came to say, Razer, with your ring so red, won't you kill the manhunters dead? Then all the lanterns loved him as they made their constructs green. Razer, the red-nosed lantern, we love you 'cause you're, we love you 'cause you're, we love you 'cause you're always mean. Was I on key?
All right, to wrap up this special holiday Christmas episode, we're going to be talking about The Spectre issue number 12. And this was written by J.M. DeMatteis with art by Ryan Sook. The cover was February of 2002. It was actually published in 2001. And the story here is The Spectre of Christmas. And to kind of frame this a little bit, you know, I mentioned in the last segment about Jack Jordan's daughter, Helen. And early on in the series, you know, Hal is merged with the Spectre, and he's trying to make the Spectre more of a spirit of redemption than a spirit of vengeance. And at one point, his brother and his wife are killed in a car accident, and Helen, their daughter, basically joins up with Hal, and Hal's responsible for taking care of her. And he has kind of a building, if you will, or a temple that he's kind of based out of, and he's trying to take care of Helen while trying to take care of his duties as the Spectre, and trying to kind of morph those responsibilities from being kind of less the traditional wrath of God to the spirit of redemption. And so this whole story, this Christmas story, is really kind of neat. And it starts out with a really neat line. And you see this gentleman, looks very Victorian or Elizabethan, and he's writing with a quill and says, "There's no sadder thing in all the world than heart of a lonely boy. Wait, there is one thing sadder, the heart of a lonely boy at Christmas." And you see a family sitting in the living room, and they're unwrapping, two of the boys are unwrapping Christmas presents, but a third child is sitting on the stairs looking rather glum. And we come to find out later on, this is the Jordan family. And Hal is the one sitting on the steps. And he's the one who's very, very sad. And as the story unravels, we'll find out why. But what happens in a nutshell is Hal, as the Spectre, meets up with Santa Claus.
A cute meeting, by the way.
What's that?
It's a really cute meeting, by the way.
Oh, yeah, it's neat because he's like, are you really Santa? You know, and he kind of half smiles, but at the same time, he then pulls back. And you can see throughout the story, at least in the beginning, Hal is torn between wanting to believe in Santa and kind of endorse his inner child. And then at the same time, he's got this cynical nature about, I don't believe in anything but myself, And so what you find out as you're going on is that Santa takes Hal to the North Pole, and the temple that Hal's in has disappeared from where it was, and it's wound up in basically the North Pole in Santa's realm. And they go to Santa's house, the North Pole, and Hal's there, and Abin Sur is there, of all people. And Charles Dickens is there.
Charles Dickens, yeah, I was going to say Charles Dickens is there.
Charles Dickens is there, and it turns out he's the person in the beginning of the story who's been writing with the quill. And Charles Dickens is actually the narrator of the story. So all of the narration balloons and boxes are of Charles Dickens. And what we find out is that Santa is real, but he's not real. And to kind of back that up a little bit, the way that they're looking at this is that all of the energy that we put into creating something in our imagination creates, if you will, its own universe. So think about this as its own multiverse in a whole metaphysical level. So as we find out, there is a whole world where Oz exists. There'd be a whole world where Harry Potter exists. And they're their own versions of reality. So the Santa is basically the congealing of all of our thoughts about what Santa Claus is. And he's very real in that reality. As is Charles Dickens is not the literal Charles Dickens, but he is the way that we idealize Charles Dickens.
Right. Good point.
So basically the temple is there because on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, the veil between all of these realities are a little bit more fragile, and that allowed the temple to pop over there. And basically, they want Hal to help them with a mission. And so Hal kind of accepts Santa. He's jovial. He joins in with the holiday feast. In the meantime, Helen is back at the temple playing Candyland with the Phantom Stranger.
I love that. And I love the phrase where I got Plumpy Grape.
Yeah.
I had to follow it back to the beginning.
It's just hard to imagine the Phantom Stranger playing Candyland with a little girl.
Right.
But it's really kind of fun in that regard. And she's worried that Hal is going to leave her because her parents have left her. And so the Phantom Stranger is trying to just reassure her. And then the scene flips back over to the North Pole, and they're about to go on their mission. And Charles Dickens is going to accompany him. And they travel to another realm, which is the exact opposite of the North Pole. And if you think about all of the metaphysical energy that created the North Pole, at the same time, everything we thought about Scrooge creates its own reality. And so there's this place where all the despair around the holidays is living in its own little realm, and Scrooge is kind of in charge of it. And Scrooge and Dickens really are having a hard time because Scrooge says, you made me the hero on the last page of the book, but people forget about the good person I became, and all they think of me about is the person I was before the last page of the book. So here I am, the version of me that people recall the most, in charge of this realm. And I don't, we're going to take over. What we're basically going to do is, while the veil is so thin, I'm going to use the Spectre and his energy and his abilities to funnel all of the despair from my realm to Earth and in the real world. And so Hal's caught in this plot, and Hal is basically being suspended by a tree. He's overtaken by all the despair, and they're going to use him to do all this stuff. And as he's there, he looks out into the audience of all these people, and he sees the crystallized versions of children and people who have lost their hope and lost, they're the ones that are reveling in the despair. And he sees two children out there, and one of them is Helen, because she had lost her mom and dad, and that's part of her feelings. But then he sees himself as a young boy, the way he was that Christmas that started out the issue. And we find out, and I thought this was really neat because it gives so much depth to Hal's character that I'm just going to kind of read some of this out loud from it. But talking about the embodied sorrow that's been dwelling for years, and Jordan knows him intimately. There, as I have noted, nothing sadder than the heart of a lonely boy at Christmas. And on this long ago Christmas morning, a young Hal Jordan had no stomach for joy. He was grieving for his father. This is the Christmas when Martin Jordan had passed.
That's a great reflection. You know what I mean? Like, especially how the book started out with him sitting on the steps or whatnot, and then going through these phases of his inner being, and then ending up here, and it actually being the reason why he was acting the way he was, because he just lost his dad.
Yeah, and it says his father was killed before Hal's eyes in a terrible accident. Is it any wonder Hal resented the gaiety, the gifts, the hollow words of cheer? And they talk about how as a boy you can kind of keep that anger and those anxious anxiety things outward, but as a person, as an adult, you might pull it in more. You might. And as Hal is reliving this Christmas, he sees the moment when his mother's trying to console him, and how she'd failed to console him and make him happy. And so for some reason, she starts to sing Deck the Halls. And the problem was that Mrs. Jordan's voice is awful. And as they described it, he says, the poor woman had a wretched voice. She shredded that song to pieces, mangled the words, exploded the tune. And for the first time, it made Hal laugh in a long time. And so the Jordan boys all start laughing, and they actually ended up being a Christmas that Hal enjoyed. And Hal basically says it's actually his favorite Christmas.
And then he starts his hysterical laugh.
Yep. So you've got that Spectre hanging upside down from a tree, laughing hysterically, and that laughter is contagious, and it basically breaks the despair, and everyone starts to laugh except for Scrooge. And what happens is every heart is changed by Hal's spreading of hope and gaiety, and with no exceptions, everyone is morphed. So the entire realm of despair is instantly transformed into the last page of A Christmas Story, where Scrooge is singing in the streets. And then Santa actually arrives, because now that there's no despair there, Santa can actually traverse the reality. And so Santa shows up and gives gifts to all the kids. And then everybody sends...
I'm sorry. There he is with the 3 moons.
Yeah. It's just neat. There's the 3 moons there, and Santa shows up. He arrives on the scene, and they're all grateful to Hal, and they give Hal all of this positive, thankful energy. And Hal is basically overcharged with all this energy. And even Ebenezer says, it feels wonderful. I don't know what's happening, but it feels great. And it feeds Hal and charges him up. And then Helen sees Hal return, so she's relieved. And then Hal basically takes all of this positive energy, and he goes near the earth, and he sends tiny sparks of gaiety and hope and love to every living creature on the earth, all at the same time. And it says, perhaps with time and with nurturing, these seeds will grow. Perhaps with time, with nurturing, the forces of cynicism and despair, greed and suspicion will no longer hold mankind in so fast a grip.
That's profound.
Yeah. And then they all say Merry Christmas, and it ends with the Phantom Stranger and Hal and Helen, and Hal's wearing his flight jacket and a Santa hat, and Ebenezer wishing the audience a Merry Christmas, and then Charles Dickens breaks the fourth wall and says, God bless us, everyone. I thought that was such a neat story. Of the 3, I think it's my favorite, because it ties in the whole Charles Dickens stuff, and it tells such a great story, and how we each have the ability to spread joy or despair, and we each have control over that, and we can all, in sharing it, brighten somebody else's life.
And who knew the Spectre had it in him to do that?
Yeah, certainly not the Spectre that would kill people in certain ways.
Yeah, not Jim Corrigan.
No, not the Jim Corrigan Spectre at all. But really a neat story. And if you haven't read the Spectre series, it's also one worth checking out. It too didn't last all that long. I can't remember exactly when it ended, but it wasn't a long series in any stretch of the imagination. I think DC was trying to figure out what to do with Hal, and they brought Hal back as the Spectre. Originally, when Jeff Johns wrote the series that brought back Hal wasn't going to be the Spectre. He was just going to be brought back as a side effect of this whole story. But it's interesting. But it was a neat series, and it really was one of those that made you think a lot.
Yeah. I liked when Hal was Spectre. I thought it was kind of cool. I thought it was kind of a neat pivot on what they could have done with him. You know, because he's been through a lot. I mean, and whenever they say whatever Green Lantern has been through a lot, I mean, that dude's been through a lot.
Yeah, I think that character's got some major history behind him, and a lot of different eras and a lot of different interpretations. And I think sometimes that's why people don't always know the character, because there's so many different incarnations, I guess is the best way to look at it.
Right.
So Volume 4 was written by Spectre Volume 4 is the series if you're looking for it. And the whole series was written by J.M. DeMatteis, who's a great writer, and he tackles a lot of just interesting pieces of Hal's character and different, just different facets of things. It's a very exploratory kind of a comic.
Kind of fun revisiting these old Christmas specials.
Yeah, and I had kind of forgotten about this particular issue, and it's funny because it was one of my favorites. This series ran 27 issues. And again, not very expensive. And the art in this series was really amazing because you had Ryan Sook, and then you had a lot of Norm Brayfogle in the second half of the series.
Yeah, I like the way the Spectre. I like the way he's drawn.
Yeah, they kind of took Hal's classic Silver Age costume and laid the Spectre cloak over top of it, but got rid of the Green Lantern logo. All right, my friend. My power ring just started to blink.
Yeah, mine's going off too.
So, Power Ring, what's the deal?
Green Lantern Myron and Green Lantern Phil. In honor of the Earth holiday season, I would like to share something I've been creating. May I continue?
Well, Phil, this was interesting. Go ahead, Power Ring. Go ahead and play what your creation is and share it with us.
Very well. My creation is called A Visit from St. Walker. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the sector, not a creature was stirring. Not even a Hammond named Hector. Their power batteries were placed in a pocket dimension with care, in hopes that St. Walker soon would be there. The lanterns were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of star sapphires danced in their heads. And Carol in her nightgown, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window, I ran like the flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of mogo to objects below. When what to my wondering eyes did appear, but a blue glowing alien riding a construct reindeer. With a tail on his head and black eyes that were beady, I knew in a moment he must be my friend, Brody. More rapid than fighter jets as azure companions they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Worth, now Isak, now Ganthet and Zaid, on Hen, on Circe, on Shan and Adara. Spread hope to the worlds, spread hope to them all. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So around Sector 2814 the blue lanterns they flew, with their rings fully charged, even St. Walker's too. And then the door rattled, the key moved in the lock. It wasn't the Indigo tribe, they would have remembered to knock. As I drew in my head, and was turning around, through the door St. Walker came with a bound. He was dressed all in blue, from his head to his feet, and his clothes were all covered with snow and sleet. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled. His dimples, how merry. On his head he wore a Santa hat, as red as a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the fake beard on his chin was as white as the snow. He was thin and spindly, too thin and tall for an elf, and I laughed when I saw him, in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work. He filled all the stockings, and then turned with a jerk. Raising his hand, his ring began to glow blue. He lifted from the floor, and out the door he flew. He sprang on his construct, to his blue reindeer gave a whistle, and away they both flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, clear as a bell, Happy Christmas to all, and know that all will be well.
All right, well, that's an uplifting Christmas story from St. Walker. And I'll say that spreading cheer and hope is the message throughout all of that, because I mean it was just a great story, Myron. Loved it.
Yeah, this is the holiday season, and I think it's time for us to reflect on this past year. I know this year has been hard for a lot of people. I know I personally just lost a friend of mine to COVID not too long ago. Someone I hadn't seen in a number of years, but still kind of hit you, and it's been hard for a lot of people. So I think it's important for us to realize that we're all in this together, and we still have a lot of things to be thankful for. And I know, Phil, I don't want to speak for you, but I know we wish the very best to our listeners, and that they all have a very joyous holiday season, regardless of what holiday they celebrate, and that we all look forward to a 2021 that's hopefully a little bit brighter and cheerier and more full of hope.
Well, my wife and I were talking about this the other day about, if you kind of think about the way this year has been, and, everybody can own up to the fact that this has just been a really crappy year for everybody, and there's no wrong or right way to feel how you need to feel, and I'll just say this, feel your feels, and it's okay to do that, because it's been tough for every person out there. Just know that. But her and I were talking about, like, there's an uplifting spirit when you think about it coming into 2020. Not to talk too heavy of politics, but we have a new president. We have a vaccine that's coming. So just know that there's hope. And it's going to take us a little while to get there. Just like it took us a while to get to where we are now. We're in December. This thing's been going since basically last December, if you really want to count. So just hang in there, just give it some time, and before you know it, we'll be back to our normal social selves. I just be nice to one another. This is a holiday season, and spread your warmth and your cheer. And I think that's the main message that St. Walker would want.
Yep. Now more than ever, I think it's very important. Like I said, we all have that power in ourselves to make somebody else's burden a little bit lighter. And I think that's really something that's important. And this time of year is definitely a reminder of that. So with that said, my friend, Merry Christmas to you and your wonderful family. I envy your first Christmas with Clark, because that's going to be so much fun. Please have the most splendid holiday. And definitely we'll be getting together early in the next year. We don't have any books in January, so we'll be talking about, maybe we'll talk about Future State, I don't know. But we'll be talking definitely about some of the retro stuff.
Well, we'll get to something. And, and my sentiments go out to you, Myron, and your family as well. It's going to be a good time. It's Clark's first Christmas, and it's also the first Christmas without my mom. So there's a little bit of conflicted feelings I've been dealing with it, and I'm just looking forward to channeling in that into Clark, so I know he can have a good time, and just so he's happy. That's all that matters.
Yep. And to all of our listeners, to all of you, we wish you the very merriest of holiday season. Please take good care of yourselves and enjoy, and we'll see you next year, definitely. So until 2021, and you know, Phil, in 2021, hindsight really will be 2020.
Hey, and on a side note, while we're leaving real quick, I did want to say that, I've been on this podcast since 2018. I started with episode 121, and we are now on episode 184, so I've done 63 episodes with you guys.
Hey. And you're stuck for life.
I'm stuck for life. I'm stuck for life. Through the thick and the thin.
That's right.
But we're looking forward to seeing you guys and hearing you guys from next year.
That's right. So until next time, my friends, please keep your power ring charged, treat each other well, and as always, make every day your brightest day. The Podcast of Oa is the official podcast of the blog of Oa and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted property.